Be careful what I say now. No, actually, I first went to Oregon in 1972 at a traveling program. I went to Portland and I met this really nice brahmachari and we became friends and still are friends. And that was Kalakanta, who's, in charge of the Krishna House in Gainesville and all those programs. He was just a young boy then. And of course, I was a young guy too. And then I went to, as a young sannyasi, which of course I still am a young sannyasi, but I went to Corvallis and and it was in Corvallis in those days. The BBT, there was no BBT book catalog. Of course, there was no internet, nothing online. And so I just thought when I was in Corvallis with a couple of brahmacharis that the BBT needs a book catalog. So I went to the student store in Corvallis and I just got like a little scissors and some scotch tape. And I took the latest Back to Godhead magazine, which in those days the inside was black and white, and just the cover was in color. And I just literally cut and pasted and typed in the text, and then I sent it to the BBT, which in those days was in Brooklyn, and that was the BBT catalog for the next several years. And it was designed in Corvallis. And then we did a program in Eugene in 1973. So anyway, little ISKCON trivia since
Thank you, Maharaj.
ISKCON has. So were you going to ask questions or
Yes, I'll just introduce what we're doing over here just real quick, before we get into it. Vaisheshika Prabhu, he started this youth think tank in
right,
ISV and youth across America. And our goal here is to basically answer these questions that we've had growing up in the movement. So all of us have grown up in it, and we've grown up in this education system. And we've had questions where we want to reconcile what we learn in school with what we learn in the temple, in the Vedas, and so on. And this
right,
group in
right.
particular, sorry,
That sounds like fun. I
I
mean,
think everyone's having a lot of fun with it. And so this group in particular is focusing on human history and just Vedic history in general. And so we
oh,
have some
great.
questions in that light and just trying to get some more information. We talked to Radhika Raman Prabhu, and he was
Yeah.
saying that you're the best person to talk to about this because if anyone has answers, it's probably you. And so that's what we're trying to do over here. I'll just quickly introduce everyone on the call. So we have Anapayani Bhakti Devi Dasi from ISV
Very
as
good.
well. Geetavali Dasi from ISV, Aditi from Portland, you just met her, and then Niharika from ISV, but now she's studying in San Diego. And so
Oh,
everyone's in
Niharika,
college.
where are you
Yeah.
from, Niharika?
Sorry, March?
Oh, where are you from?
I'm also from ISV.
Oh,
Yes.
hey, here's a little factoid. I did Harinam Sankirtan in San Jose, um, 55 years ago because oh, sorry, there's not enough light here. I had an electric cut in the circuit of my effulgence. So let's see. Yeah, because I joined the movement in Berkeley, and so yeah, so I did Harinam there in 19. We had a little preaching center, and actually in 1969. But anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, that's it. Now we can just get right into the questions, Maharaj. I think Anapayani Bhakti will be starting us off. So everyone's like in college, everyone except me. Everyone's studying either something STEM related or business related, or I think Niharika also cognitive science related. So all in
Poor
different kinds
boy,
of fields.
poor humanities. Okay. I mean, wouldn't you rather study humanities and starve to death? So, oh, Geetavali, what do you study?
Oh, I'm a humanities major, Marge.
Oh, what is there a particular?
Yes, I'm going into political science.
Oh my God, we definitely have to talk. Okay, so and I also, of course, I like the STEM people too. So go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So the first question, our overarching question that we had was, how did our knowledge get so lost from like over time trying to map it out? So this first specific question was, what was the world like 5,000 years ago? Who lived in like the Americas, Europe, Africa, and did they all practice the Vedic religions?
Okay, here we go. Um, okay, first of all, one very interesting fact is that if you, for the time being, just sort of put aside the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, and Australasia, then what you have is you have the overwhelming majority of all the people on Earth, because although we call Africa, Asia, and Europe continents, it's really one huge landmass. Especially pre-Suez Canal. So you have one huge landmass. And so if you look at a flat map of the world, what you find is, one second, I'm just going to let a little more light in. If you look at a flat map of the world and you realize that, the overwhelming majority of people in the world lived on that one huge landmass, India is actually in the center of the world. Not only that, up until 300 or 400 years ago, India had like 30 or 40% of all the wealth on the planet. And, in terms of natural wealth, in terms of precious and semi-precious stones, in terms of agricultural production and textiles and precious metals. So we also have evidence that, at least 4,000 years ago, and probably much earlier, that India had contact with the rest of the world. For example, in what is now Pakistan and West India, Gujarat, there's all kinds of archaeological remains of what is called the Harappan civilization, and these were sophisticated cities that go back 4,000 years and earlier. Some of the settlements in that area go back 7,000 or 8,000 years before Krishna came. But in the ones around, 4,000 years ago, they had indoor plumbing. These were very sophisticated cities, and they are actually sort of surrounding what satellite photography has revealed to be the ancient Saraswati River. We also know from the Rig Veda that whereas in the later literature like Mahabharata and the Puranas, Bhagavatam, and so on, that the main river is Ganga and maybe close second Jamuna, but in the older Rig Veda, the main river is the Saraswati, and it actually runs right through this ancient civilization which has been lost. There's great debate, was it Vedic or not? People don't know because there's no Rosetta Stone. And so they have these seals, what are called the Harappan seals, but it would just we don't know if it's a language or pictographic, but some of these seals were found in Denmark, specifically a seal showing Lord Shiva as Pashupati. This is going back many thousands of years. There's also what is called the Mitanni Treaty. There was an ancient kingdom in sort of the Middle East that signed a peace treaty with the, oh my God, in central Turkey, the Hittite civilization, honk if you love the Hittites. But anyway, so what's interesting about the Hittites is that they spoke a European language. And they're attested to, they're mentioned in the Old Testament, and they found this peace treaty between the Hittites and the Mitannis, and what's interesting about this peace treaty, which is almost 4,000 years old, is that at the end of the treaty, to make sure everyone is honest and does what they say they're going to do, they promise to keep this treaty in the name of the gods. And so they mention all these gods and goddesses. But interestingly, at the end of it, they add on all these gods and goddesses who are actually from the Rig Veda, and they add on just enough to make it come to the number 108. They've also found chariot racing manuals with technical terms in Sanskrit from that part of the world. There's also linguistic evidence. For example, the "ire" in Ireland comes from the Sanskrit word Arya, as does Iran. The ancient Persian Empire was founded by Cyrus the Great, who's actually listed in the Old Testament as a Messiah, because Messiah in Hebrew, Messiah, meant like someone that not just a religious leader, but a military leader, like King David, who, when the Jews were being oppressed by foreign power, he organizes them and throws off the foreign power and so on. So Cyrus the Great is listed as a Messiah in the Old Testament because the Jews had been conquered by the Babylonians because of, anyway, some really stupid political decisions they made. So they were taken to Babylon sort of in this semi, sort of indentured state. And then Cyrus came in with the first great Persian Empire, conquered Babylonia, and invited the Jews to return to their homeland in Israel, and even gave them money to help rebuild the temple. Now, here's the interesting point why I mention this. First of all, as a background, the ancient Persian language, which is called the Avestan language, after the great sacred text they have, the Zoroastrians, it's written in a dialect of Sanskrit. Ancient Persian is a dialect of Sanskrit. And that's why, for example, when I was at Harvard, I was in the Sanskrit and Indian Studies department, and they taught ancient Persian in that department because it's a dialect of Vedic Sanskrit. Another interesting fact, that Cyrus was they say he's one of the few great leaders in history who was actually admired and respected everywhere. He did things like he abolished slavery, which was very unusual at that time. He declared complete religious freedom, which was unusual. And the final point is his name actually wasn't Cyrus. In his own language, his name was actually Kuru, which was one of the main king names in Vedic culture. And he spoke a dialect of Sanskrit. And he abolished slavery and declared religious freedom, two cultural features which were also found in ancient India. And we know that because there was an ambassador, Greek ambassador to India, maybe about 2,300 years ago, named Megasthenes, who wrote a book which was a bestseller in the ancient world called Indica, which means about India. And he describes that India, unlike everywhere else, does not have slavery. He describes this very sophisticated culture where people have rights and and something which was extraordinary for the ancient world, that if there's a war going on, a battle with combatants on each side, no one will ever injure a non-combatant. That was unheard of. If you study Roman history, Greek history, Alexander the Great, you lay siege to the city, and if they don't just open the city gates and go quietly, then you have to make an object lesson because it's way too much trouble to have to lay siege to one city after another. So what you do is, you basically you do what any good conqueror would do. You kill all the men, enslaved, and rape the women, and just all those, just normal behavior. So India was completely extraordinary in the sense they didn't have slavery, and King Kuru, the first great Persian emperor, abolished slavery. So there's all these interesting things. So that's something about the ancient history of India. As far as the Puranas, ancient history, all the evidence we have is that ancient India was an oral society. Because if you look at the Bhagavatam, if you look at the Mahabharata, you actually will not find anyone that ever writes anything. I mean, they had probably the most powerful memories in the history of the world. And the evidence that when I was at Harvard, the chairman of our department, who was a famous Vedicist, sounds like a funny word, but anyway, studied the Vedas. He said it's like we have a tape recording from thousands of years ago. Because if you know in the sixth canto of the Bhagavatam, the story of Vritrasura, in the Vedas, in the Karma Kanda Vedas, the power was actually in the phonemes. The power was in the sounds themselves. And so therefore, I mean, the example given in the Bhagavatam is that Twashta was performing a sacrifice to create like a monster, this creature that would kill Indra. But he was supposed to say Indra Shatru and put the accent on Sha, Indra Shatru, which means that this sacrifice will produce a creature who will be the mortal enemy of Indra. But maybe he was just kind of like, I don't know, he got a text on his phone or something, but he kind of, just for a minute didn't pay attention. And instead of saying Indra Shatru, he said Indra Shatru, which means Indra will be the mortal enemy of that creature. So because of one misplaced accent, it had the opposite effect. Therefore, the Karma Kanda Brahmins had to memorize every word, every accent, everything perfectly, and they did it. It's the greatest memorization feat in human history. I know my professor at Harvard used to say it's like when you hear the Brahmins of this day chanting, it's like a tape recording from thousands of years ago. So those are some features. I'm just sort of giving you a general picture of what ancient India was. ISKCON is full of urban legends. I'm speaking as a member of ISKCON, but as one who likes to be rational whenever possible. And so, for example, there's all kinds of things we say like devotional dress, which of course, there's no such thing in Shastra. I mean, if you look at India, I mean, Indians lived on tropical beaches, in rainforests, on the highest mountains in the world, in deserts, and obviously they dress differently. And there is no such thing as devotional dress. Actually, the only thing Bhagavatam says about dress is that sannyasis have three options. Tree bark, hopefully with ancient Velcro, whatever that was. So you can dress in tree bark or in deer skin, or you can streak. I mean, sannyasis, don't wear anything. It's like the Naga Baba. So clearly all three of those options are not very enticing today. In fact, Lord Chaitanya forbade he forbade his disciples to dress in tree bark, even though it's enjoined in the Bhagavatam. And Lord Chaitanya said the Bhagavatam is our most important text. So what's going on? It's a detail. Chapter 6, Nectar Devotion. There are basic principles, invariable, and there are details which are variable. And so if you want to be a spiritual scientist, the world needs spiritual scientists because the existence of a science is useless if there's no scientist. In other words, let's say someone has an illness and there's actually a cure for it, but there are no doctors around. So if we take variable details to be basic principles, and dress is a variable detail. Here's a direct quote from Prabhupada. We do not care about dress. Dress is a dead thing. We care about living consciousness. And so I have pages and pages of quotes from Prabhupada on this topic and papers I've written, which I'll send you if you like.
Yeah, just to follow up,
Yes,
within
please.
these different cultures, was everyone following like Vaishnavism when the world, or was there lots of different religions in these places? And how did things change from that superior civilization in the past?
Okay. So I'll just wrap up that topic, and then I'll get right to that in a second. That's a very good. So anyway, so there's all kinds of. I mean, if we are going to be spiritual scientists and present Krishna consciousness, not in a way which is sort of half science, half mythology, half inventions, we have to know all these things. And now your question. You can repeat it? Okay.
Yeah, so I was wondering what religions were present
Yes.
within these places? Was it all Vaishnavism, and how did that superior civilization get lost over time?
Well, interestingly, uh, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the science is lost. At the beginning of chapter 4. Imang vivassate yogam proktavan aham abhya. I spoke this imperishable spiritual science to Vivasan to his son Manu, and Manu to his son Ishwaku. And then Krishna says, Evam parampara praptam. The science comes down through parampara, but Evam parampara praptam among Rajar Sayobidu, and the sages and kings understood it in that way. But Sakali Neha Mahata, but by great time, literally Mahakala, by great time, which can mean powerful time or it can mean a long amount of time. So by great time, Yoga Nashta, the science was lost. And then Saivaya Mayate Jad Yoga Prokta Puratana. Now I'm again teaching you this ancient science. So Krishna, that's the first statement we have going back 5,000 years about the fragility of text traditions and how they can be corrupted. So, so now, of course, then Lord Chaitanya came. But for example, the Mahabharata, Madhvacharya wrote a book on the Mahabharata in which he says most of the original verses are lost and the text is corrupted throughout. And that's why you have the Bhagavatam, which is sort of correcting the Mahabharata in various ways. That's another topic. So, did you want to pursue that, or did I address your
Yeah,
point?
that makes sense. I was just curious, were there other religions at the
Oh, yes, yes, of course.
like
Sorry. Okay, I'll buy you a nectar drink next time I see you because I forgot your. Yes, actually, one really interesting thing is that in the Bhagavatam and in the Mahabharata, there's no mention of a religious institution. That's one point. Religious institutions come thousands of years later. Very interesting point. Also, if you look at Mahabharata, which really gives you like the most sustained picture of life back then, what's very interesting is that Krishna says in the Gita, the science is lost. So Krishna declares that he has come to a civilization, he's descended into a civilization in which the spiritual science is lost. And that's why he's speaking to Arjuna. So we would expect to find, so basically there obviously is a shared culture. And the shared culture is basically Varnashram. Basically Varnashram. So if you want to talk about Vedic culture, that's a term that devotees use about 108 times a day. Vedic culture, but actually there's no evidence in any shastra of a standard ethnicity. And so what is Vedic culture is not a certain way of dressing, it's not certain recipes, it's not certain musical styles, because there's no evidence for that. But what there's overwhelming evidence for is Varnashram. I mean, Varnashram is literally, it's in the Rig Veda, it's in the 10th book of the Rig Veda. And you get in this second canto of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada titles one chapter, Purusha Sukta Confirmed. The Purusha Sukta is a great hymn in the 10th book of the Rig Veda, which maps the four social orders onto the body of this Virat body of God. So I think it's important because even if you knew how Krishna dressed 5,000 years ago and you don't, not from Shastra, he just like his color was yellow. He liked yellow. So he had a lot of yellow stuff in his closet. But as far as did Krishna wear a dhoti? No evidence. We have evidence that the ladies did not wear saris because it said in the Bhagavatam the gopis wore belts and blouses. People don't wear belts with saris. So we actually have scriptural. So this idea, which you see everywhere in ISKCON art, of the gopis wearing saris and even covering their head, which is another totally non-Vedic thing. women, there's no mention anywhere in any Shastra of women covering their head. Another non-Vedic thing is calling women Mataji. I actually did research, and what you find is in the Vedas, in the Bhagavatam, I looked at the Bhagavatam, at every scene in the Bhagavatam where a man speaks to a woman that's not his wife. And so calling women mother, maybe it's Chanakya Pandit thought it was a good idea. It's not in Shastra, and it's not what people did. And to me, it's kind of because it's like trying to keep men and women apart by raising this threat of incest, which is, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's a little icky. So, I mean, I don't think that I have to have incest in my mind in order not to, inappropriately attack women. And what you find is that men do call women by their names, although I've heard, I mean, there's so many things in ISKCON, like, yes, women, they don't even call their husband by the name and all of that. But that's just not what people did. It's interesting because Prabhupada mentions the custom, which is not even a pan-Indian custom of calling women Mataji. It's actually Bengali. It's not even, I mean, I've talked to many very educated Hindus in India that said it sounds weird to us. So all these things like devotional dress, sari, and how did Krishna dress? If I can just, raise that point. And if you raise just as a scholar, but as a faithful scholar, accepting Shastra, if you say, how did Krishna dress? For one thing, Kunti Devi says in her prayers to Krishna that when you come nato natya dharojata, like an actor in costume. So even if we knew how Krishna dressed, and we don't, because the word dhoti and the word sari are not even Sanskrit words. So even if we knew how Krishna dressed, it doesn't mean that's how people dress in the spiritual world, because Kunti says you're like an actor in costume. And we also have a verse in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, which says that Kritavan Kila, the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, Kritavan Kila Karmani Saharamena Keshava, that Keshava performed pastimes with Rama, and he came, but his activities were Ati Martyani, literally superhuman. Ati Martyani Bhagavan Guda Kapita Manusha. And he was disguised. He came in disguise, pretending to be a human being. So however Krishna dressed, whatever customs he followed, he was pretending he was fitting in with humans, he was in disguise, and so on. The reason I'm mentioning all of this to you is because I expect you to give me a large donation when you get older and make a lot of money. I'm just kidding. No, that's not the real reason. The reason I'm explaining all this to you is because the only way this movement will really spread, and it's not, I mean, from a historian's point of view, we're not making it. We're not making it. I mean, if you look at what the movement was, the influence it had, most people in this country, especially all the younger generations, no one's heard of the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada's entire global strategy depends on making it in the West. It's not happening. There are many wonderful devotees. Vaisheshika is one of the best of our devotees. I mean, there are many wonderful devotees. There are many great programs. But in the simple point, we are not actually ISKCON today and ISKCON what it was when Prabhupada was here. They're very, very, very different. Extremely different. And so my contention to you is that the only thing the Western world will ultimately accept from us is a spiritual science. A spiritual science. And if you want to present a spiritual science, you have to have an educated, rational understanding of who we are and what we're doing. And you can't just give people all these urban legends and, devotional dress, a term kind of invented by the Hare Krishna movement.
Marge, just
Yeah.
following up on this very point, we were
Yes.
wondering how we can show the Vedas are not mythology, but actually history. And like things like flying mountains, thousands of arrows, and those things are not fiction.
Oh, I have a flying mountain. I'm just kidding. Oh, so Okay, how do we do that? You don't lead with that. You don't go up to someone on the street and say, "Hi, can I talk to you about flying mountains?" So the point is this: there are many things in quantum mechanics which are just as weird as flying mountains. And so the first thing is you have to persuade someone that you are a rational human being, that you're intelligent, you're rational, and if they and we have powerful philosophy. We have very powerful, when I'm doing a lot of work now in academic philosophy, and I mean, just briefly, the academic philosophers nowadays, I mean, they wouldn't know real philosophy if they tripped over it, most of them. There's a few good philosophers, but there's like unlimited nonsense going on. And we can easily defeat materialism as a philosophy. I gave a talk, which you can find on, we had a summer school for the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and I showed how logically it's impossible that physicalism can be shown to be true. Because anyway, that's a whole other talk. We could talk for hours about serious academic philosophy, but as a philosophy, it actually fails. Not because it's not Krishna conscious, it just fails as philosophy. It's based on all kinds of internal contradictions, hypocrisy, foolish assumptions. And I mean, maybe someday we can arrange a talk just on that, how materialism materially, logically fails. And so Prabhupada, why did Prabhupada come? Because he kept saying that the modern society is headless. And we have to put a head on the society. And so we have to put a head in society. So then you can ask a socio-historical question, which of course no one ever asks. And that is, in sociological terms, in historical terms, what do you have to do to get a group of people accepted as the Brahmins of society, especially in a society in which they don't recognize the Varna system? It's not going to happen just by, frankly, beating drums and dancing around the street. It's just not going to happen. It's not happening. I'm not saying we shouldn't do Harinam, but how does it happen? It happens if we become the teachers. Why did Lord Chaitanya appear as a Brahmana? I mean, that's a really good question, because 5,000 years ago, he appeared as a Kshatriya, because to establish Dharma, he had to, a lot of heads had to fly. But why did Lord Chaitanya? Because in this age, there's no violence. Not a single person is killed in Chaitanya Leela. In Krishna Leela, you need like a supercomputer to keep track of all the heads that are rolling. And so Lord Chaitanya, because in this age, it's Sankirtan, Yagyar Sankirtan Prayar, and so on. But in this age, to establish the Vaishnavas as the real teachers, you have to be educated. You have to be intelligent. I don't mean that people didn't go to college can't be great devotees. That's not my point. But ultimately, we have to make a rational presentation of Krishna consciousness, which is not happening in very many places in the Western world. And so, as far as the flying mountains, get yours today. Anyway, but wait, call today and I'll send you a flying mountain. No, the point is that if we have to become the teachers, and just as Lord Chaitanya took sannyas, because in that age, that's what you had to do, sannyas. Nowadays, I mean, frankly, if I tell people, yeah, I have no association with women, that they may wonder about my orientation. So what I mean to say is, in the Western world, it's not like it was in India. To take sannyas was like a PhD back then. That's why when Lord Chaitanya went to Puri, when he was singing and dancing in the temple, and then Sarvabhauma, who was a great scholar, brought him in and said, "Hey, kid, he's a young guy, let's talk." And he said, "Why are you singing and dancing?" Imagine if you were at a good university, let's say you're at a really good university like Stanford or something, and you go to a philosophy class and the teacher starts singing and dancing. And you think like, what's going on? This is a philosophy class. So that was the reaction to Lord Chaitanya. Because and so the point I'm making is that he took sannyas because that was like a PhD. You were expected to be a scholar. So in this age, it's not about sannyas. There's certain ways in which people get credentials. And it doesn't mean you have to change your major in college or something, but we have to be rational. We have to be intelligent. We have to know the Shastras. We can't just go preaching all these urban legends, which are not in Shastra, which are some of the most popular preaching points in ISKCON. We actually have to know what it says, what the original text says. And I mean, it's not that, what you thought was our philosophy is not really our philosophy. That's not my point. I mean, the philosophy really is the philosophy as you learned it. But I found if you make an intelligent presentation, if you studied, if you've done your homework, then even take flying mountains. It's I mean, the first thing is we don't have evidence there weren't flying mountains. The skepticism about, say, a flying mountain. Like, it's a tough one. I'll take that on. The skepticism is based on an unproven assumption of contemporary science. The unproven and unprovable, actually, assumption is that the laws of nature have always operated in the same way they do now throughout time and space. So if you take pictures with the Webb telescope, let's say, they're assuming that light travels at the same speed throughout the universe, or that, let's say, when light passes through a gaseous atmosphere, it divides the wavelengths in certain ways, which is basically how astronomy is done nowadays. In other words, they're making all these assumptions. But what if the laws of nature don't operate uniformly throughout the universe? And that's something they can't prove. In fact, sometimes scientists are saying it's become harder and harder to prove that. And with the Webb telescope, I mean, on the one hand, our knowledge increased, but on the other hand, our awareness of how much we don't know increased. I mean, what is dark matter? They say that 90% or whatever it is of the universe is dark matter, and no one knows what that is. That's why what I tell people is that nowadays it's become absurd to call yourself a materialist for one simple reason: no one knows what matter is.
Thank you, Maharaj. I think that kind of summarizes what we're trying to do here. We're trying to present Krishna consciousness in rational ways that make sense to us first and then to others. I was just
Yeah,
since we were kind of short on time, Maharaj, because some of them have to drop off in a couple minutes. I was wondering if we could squeeze in a couple more history questions. Um,
sure. Sorry.
we don't want
And
to
by the way, I
waste your
mean,
time too. Yes.
I'm not saying this just because I'm proud, which I am, but that's not the reason here. And that is that I have all this, there's all these lectures. I explain all these things. How to, it's hdgoswami.com. Tell your friends. But anyway, there's like all kinds of content which actually shows you how to present Krishna consciousness to educated people in a scientific, rational way. But go ahead. I'm going to throw in a few more questions for the same price.
Gitava, you can go ahead.
Marge, we were just wondering, why did Krishna only appear, or the Lord, his incarnations, why did they only appear in India? Because isn't the whole
Practical.
purpose?
Why is it that in San Jose there's only one major airport? Because I mean, consider this. First of all, India was in the center of the world. The Iyer in Ireland, the Ir in Iran, that's all Arya. And so if Krishna appears and reveals all this knowledge, there has to be continuity. I mean, otherwise, let's say next time he's going to Guatemala, and then you got to start all over again. There's no cultural continuity, and inevitably, Krishna says Kali Neha Mata, that by time people tend to forget, but they have scriptures they can refer back to. So it would just be chaotic to come to a different place every time. I know nowadays everything is supposed to be democratic, but some things, it's like, yeah, why is there one major airport in San Jose? Why does the Pentagon have one major building. It's just that's the way practical things are done.
To
And
follow up this, oh, sorry, please
no, go
continue.
ahead. No,
I
go
was saying
ahead.
just to follow up, wouldn't that make it almost like limited access to the Vedas? Like so many places in the world just don't, like for example, the West didn't know anything about like Krishna consciousness, etc. So I was wondering more in that aspect.
Okay. A few things I can say about that. Number one, people take birth in different places. That's all, that big computer, Vaikuntha computer figures that out. And so there has to be one place where you can get an intensive course. It's like, for example, let's take Stanford University, which is near which is supposed to be a great university, although it's kind of flaky in some ways. But anyway, let's say Stanford University. It's an elite university. Berkeley's also elite, but there's so many other colleges. There's San Jose State, there's a Hayward State, there's all these other colleges, and there's junior colleges, and there's Sonoma State University, and there's colleges all over the place, but then there are elite schools. That's natural. So you can say, why doesn't every town and village in California have an elite university? Because it's not practical. And so in the same way, India is where you had elite knowledge. It's like the Harvard or the Stanford. And meanwhile, in other places, they have their religious traditions and they are getting knowledge according to their ability. But then again, it's like if you go to a good undergraduate school and you want to go to an elite graduate school. So it's just the way the real world works. It's pragmatic. And another thing is there was much more contact between India and other parts of the world than people imagine. If you look at a map, we know that there was commerce many thousands of years ago between Western India and the Persian Gulf and even the Red Sea. And then once you get into the Mediterranean, which is just very close, you're into Europe, North Africa. So the world in general was much more connected than people know now, or people think nowadays. And as far as what was going on in the Americas, different story. But so as far as the great civilizations that we know about, apart from the Incas and the Aztecs, were kind of awful. I mean the Aztecs, but so India was connected to the world. I mean, linguistically, again, the Iyer in Ireland is Arya. And why is it that even the North European languages, not speaking of the Southern European languages, are full of Sanskrit? All the Slavic languages have just like thousands of Sanskrit words, ditto for English. I mean, we don't have time now, but I could go on all day showing you Sanskrit and English. And so people were connected. It wasn't just, later in India, when you get into Kali Yuga, you get into India, which is kind of sealed off. It doesn't really, reach out to the world. But so there are many reasons for it.
Is India connected to like, or part of the Varsha, as it's said sometimes? Is that connected to like Pangea, as I've heard that sometimes? Is there any kind of like understanding of
Well,
what that?
the geologists think that it broke off, and then it broke off from sort of South America as one big landmass, and then it sort of went sailing. And then when it bumped into Asia, because that was a big bump, and that's what pushed up the Himalayas. That's where you get the high mountains. It's from the South Asian landmass bumping into Central Asia and then pushing up the land so high.
So was there ever this time the full world was following like Vaishnavism or like following the
Even in the Mahabharata, people all over the place are worshiping Shiva for all the wrong reasons. And, just to get this or kill somebody or, whatever. And no, Krishna came because he said, yeah, if you go, proportionally, as you go back to Treta Yuga, or even maybe early Dwapara, and certainly Satya Yuga, but as it comes down, Dharma is decreasing. That's what the Bhagavatam says. As you cycle through these yugas, real Dharma is just decreasing more and more and more. And so 5,000 years ago, the Bhagavatam says, I think several times, that the very moment that Krishna left this world, the Kali Yuga began. And so just as, for example, now we're getting into the fall and starting to get cooler, the days are shorter. As we get toward winter, it's not that just like, yesterday was fall and today is winter. It's gradual. And so in the same way, you get what is called Yuga Sandhya. Sandhya is a conjunction, like things coming together. So when two yugas are coming together, it's like, for example, if you go down to Southern California, a lot of people, even gringos, speak Spanish. So, I mean, people in border areas tend to be bilingual because they do commerce, they have neighbors and everything. And so, in the same way, as you get near the point where one yuga becomes another, you get this period where the qualities of one yuga start to manifest. And that's also in the Bhagavatam, where Yudhisthira sees all these omens and he understands Kali Yuga is coming. It wasn't Kali Yuga, it was many years away. But it's like you can get in cold places in America, you get the first freeze maybe in November. It's not winter yet, technically, but you get a freeze. And so the farther back you go toward the Satya Yuga, the more you get like this universal enlightened culture. And as you come down through Treta Yuga, where it said in all the Shastras that you sort of lose 25%, a quarter is lost. Then you come into Dwapara Yuga, and even more is lost. And then
Mhm.
Kali Yuga. And you see that in the allegorical story in the first canto, where Dharma is standing only on one leg. And so that represents that Vedic culture, using that term, uh, has diminished by 75%.
So is the reason that like Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Krishna consciousness is such a small sect of Hinduism, I guess today, is that just based on the consciousness of the like everyone wanted different things? Like not everyone
I
was
would
like
say, yeah, I would say
Mhm.
it's not so small in India. It's expanding dramatically in India. I mean, historical time. There's like geologic time, and there's historical time, and then there's how long you'll wait in line to check out at the Whole Foods before you start to get angry. So so in terms of historical time, it's spreading. Yeah, and in fact, we have evidence from scholars who are not devotees, highly respected scholars who say that Lord Chaitanya's movement for a couple hundred years had a powerful influence on India, transformed India, diminished communal violence and conflict. And then, of course, as we know, kind of fell on hard times. So in India, it's growing powerfully, and it'll grow in America also if we stop trying to re-ethnicize Americans. We're supposed to be giving them a spiritual science, not a new ethnicity. And so if we could somehow or other clue in, to use the vernacular, and start giving people a spiritual science. Flying mountains, I'll say, well, how do you know there weren't flying mountains? And, why aren't they still around? Well, there are a lot of things that aren't still around. And you get into philosophy. It's a philosophical question. Because if you say in other words, the question, how could you have flying mountains? It's actually implicit in that question is a doubt, like, there couldn't be such things. Or if there were flying mountains, they'd still be around or there'd be evidence of them. And those are metaphysical assumptions. Those are assumptions. Those aren't scientific assumptions. They're theological assumptions because science has become polluted by theology. Like, for example, I'm going to give a keynote address on an evolution conference in January. And so, for example, one of the arguments against divine creation or intelligent design is vestigial traits. I can give an example. Let's say they say human beings evolved from, let's say, four-legged mammals, and those four-legged mammals had tails for various reasons. And so we don't have tails, but we do have a little knob at the end of our spine, which is like a vestige of it. So they're saying that if God created the universe, it would be much more neat, and you wouldn't have kind of like those things hanging over. But my point is, when you say that, you're not doing science, you're doing theology. In other words, it's polluting science with theology. Who the hell are you who wouldn't know, God from a hole in the ground. Who are you to say that if there's a God, he would behave like this, or she or they would behave like this? So science, just like if you go back to the Middle Ages, science was polluted by the Christian church that, wanted to, as Galileo apparently said, or one of his friends said, not only tell us how to go to heaven, but they want to tell us how the heavens go. In other words, they want to do astronomy and also theology. And, if you're just wrapped up in theology, it probably won't be great astronomy. And so, in the same way, if you're doing science, but you want to stick theology into it, that's not science. They're cheating. And they're there's like smuggling their own stupid atheistic theology into science. That's not science. And last point I'll make, and this is really important in logic. I mean, we have to know philosophy. You are young, intelligent devotees. And, if this movement has any hope, your generation has to get with it. Here's a point of logic you can use on people, that if you affirm or deny a claim in any domain of knowledge, it must be in the same domain. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're giving a spelling test to some kids and you mark their answers right or wrong. If you say the answer is right, that's a spelling claim. And if you say the answer is wrong, it's still a spelling claim. So, for example, if in public universities, you can't teach that, yes, Zeus really was the god of weather, thunder, and lightning, still is. Therefore, if you want good weather, make an offering to Zeus. You can't teach that in a university. They'll throw you out. But you can teach that there is no Zeus. However, according to logic, according to simple formal logic, if you say Zeus exists or doesn't exist, those are equally religious claims. So for a so-called scientist to say that if God existed, he wouldn't leave vestigial features, that's a theological claim. It's a religious claim. You're claiming to know that if God existed, this is what God would be like. So
Mark?
we have to be, yeah.
No, please continue. Please continue.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's essential that your generation, I mean, you're young and intelligent, and you can't just go around, ringing. Prabhupada said, I mean, he said, it's famous. He said, let the neophytes stay in the temples and ring the bells. We have to go out. I don't mean to denigrate the deity worship. We all love the deities. We all love the deity worship. But your generation has to educate yourselves. You have to know philosophy. Philosophy is a lingua franca. Let me just send one little note, and I know you guys got to go, but I have another meeting. My God, let's see. Krishna, everyone quotes that verse. It's one of the big verses everyone quotes in the Gita. Tadvidhi pranipatena. Have you ever heard that? Just, in the somewhat non-literal translation, but, basically is what it says. Just approach a spiritual master and so on. But that Sanskrit verse, tadvidhi, begins with the word tat, that. Now, if you begin an English sentence by saying that, understand, the logical question you'd ask is, what is that? What is that? Which is the same question you'd ask in Sanskrit. And that is defined in the previous verse. No one reads 433. Everyone just kind of hovers over these famous verses without really understanding the Gita. And so in the previous verse, Krishna says that much better than worshiping me with rituals, paraphernalia, like incense, like a lamp, like a conch with water, Krishna says much better than that is to worship me by knowledge, by giving out knowledge. And then he says, and you can understand that from those who know. So your generation, you're all intelligent. And what you need to do is not just spread the highest philosophy, but mixed everywhere with ISKCON urban legends. Like, for example, there's one devotee, he's really intelligent. He lives in Scandinavia. Really good, intelligent devotees, but he makes a living teaching yoga, and he tells the yoga students that lust is in your fingers. It's like, what? I mean, there's all this cuckoo stuff in ISKCON. Like, for example, you can't go on the altar with stitched clothing. Why the hell not? Prabhupada did. We have pictures of Prabhupada with stitched clothing, kurta and everything, just installing Radha Krishna, worshiping. And my favorite is that when you chant Gayatri mantra, you have to cover your hand so these sort of evil spirits don't. And amazing about these evil spirits, they can penetrate a right hand, but not a left hand. And they also bounce off cotton or silk or any fabric, because if you just cover your hand, they can actually penetrate into your subtle region and steal all your sanskaras. But amazingly, they bounce off cotton. And I mean, this is wacko. And it's like ISKCON lore. We have pictures of Prabhupada chanting Gayatri mantra, sort of like brazenly exposing his hand to the hobgoblins. And so we need a scientific presentation of Krishna consciousness. Without it, it's not going to work. We're not going to save the planet. So that's my appeal to all of you. I mean, you guys are young, intelligent, devoted. You've got to rationalize the Hare Krishna movement, or at least rationalize the preaching. I mean, it's what we need to do.
Last question, Marge, if you have a little bit more time. I'm not sure. Do you have
I
to
do,
go?
yes.
You
No,
can
no,
go ahead.
you guys are the future. I mean, if ISKCON has any hope, it's your generation.
Marge, we were just wondering what resources would you recommend for us to look into to, gain more knowledge about our project?
Okay, I would say keep in touch with me. And I mean, you're all welcome, because you guys are the future. I'm like, as they say, one foot in the grave, the other foot on a banana peel. So yeah, I mean, you guys are the future. You are the hope. When I used to be in Prabhupada's room, when devotees would come with their little babies, in those days, they're only like little kids. There were no, and Prabhupada would always say the same thing. He would look at us very gravely and say, they're the future hope. So I'm saying it to you. If ISKCON has any hope of saving this planet, it's your generation. So yeah, hdgoswami.com. It's free, and you don't need a password. And just keep in touch. And I can recommend books. I can recommend things. You have to become philosophers. I don't mean all this nonsense technical stuff they do sometimes in these anal philosophy departments, but I mean just like the kind of things I'm telling you. You
Do you have
have
any
to make
books that we could, sorry, you can finish your point,
no,
Marge. I was
no,
wondering,
no.
you mentioned a lot of different things as we were like about these different civilizations and so on. How did you assimilate all that knowledge? What books? Like, we're not very academic, I would say. We're all kind of students in different fields. We're just trying to answer questions here. So what's like a good maybe gateway book that kind of summarizes everything? We're
I
reading
gave yeah,
Devamrita Swami's right now, but
yeah,
just any more suggestions?
yeah, because for 2 semesters I taught the entire history of religion in India at the University of Florida, and that's free. It's online. You can find it. It gives you the entire history from the earliest Vedic literature up until the Hare Krishna movement today. It'll give you an overview of the entire history of India. And
Got
I
it. I
would
think I've
say,
seen that one on your website. That so does it cover also like what sections would you recommend? There's a lot of like on different kind of like does the whole thing kind of interweave history through it as well in the
no,
whole
it was a course on
the
history.
course on history. Got it.
It wasn't just preaching at the University of Florida. It was which is now one of the top 5 public universities. It was actually history. It was the history of India, but giving special attention to the religious history. But it gives
Got
you
it.
the whole historical context. So keep in touch. I mean, we have all these resources. I have a paper called Understanding Prabhupada, in which I explain that Prabhupada himself says over and over again, I do not speak infallibly when I'm not quoting Shastra. He says it would be ludicrous to think that. Ludicrous means so absurd it's comical. So in terms of how to understand Prabhupada according to his own words, how to understand Indian history, it's all there on the website. And then And then if that's like a good introduction, then if you have any questions, just write to me and I can recommend books or whatever.
Thank you, Mars. That would be wonderful. We were so grateful for your time. This was amazing. It was very eye-opening, and I think we're gonna take a lot from it and come back to you with a lot more questions. We appreciate you giving us your time and just lending your entire self to help with our project. We really, really appreciate it, Marge. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for listening. I mean, again, I've said it over and over again, but you are the hope that Prabhupada's mission will rise again.
Thank you, Marge. With your
So
blessings.
yeah, y'all just if you just open the window and holler, and if you have a question, and yeah, just go to hdgoswami.com, and there's like all this stuff. There's an essay, Understanding Prabhupada, that gives a rational, Shastra-based understanding of Prabhupada's authority, his limits, based on Prabhupada's own teachings, based on the Bhagavatam, based on everything. Okay, well, thank
Sounds
you
good.
so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Marge.
much.
No, it's really my
Really.
pleasure. And yeah, you guys are our hope.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
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 Hare Krishna.